Welcome to In Conversation, the podcast where we bring bold thinkers, change makers, and industry leaders to explore how Africa's private sector can drive inclusive economic growth. Hosted by Inkomoko, this series will dive into unpacking the opportunities that lie within Africa's entrepreneurial landscape, especially for marginalized and displaced economies. Whether you're a business leader, a change maker, an innovator, an investor, In Conversation is the front row seat to the conversations shaping the future of Africa's economy. Nancy, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
UNHCR has long been recognized for its humanitarian work, but in recent years, or not so recent years, there has been a shift towards economic inclusion and leveraging private sector partnerships. And you are passionate about that. You have been in the space for quite a number of years. You have championed a future where displaced people, or you're working to champion a future where displaced people are not just seen as recipients of assistance, but as economic actors, contributing to Africa's prosperity in the areas that they live in. Now, in your work in these years and in the continent of Africa, I know you've worked in other parts of the world. What has been a huge barrier or a gap that exists to leverage private sector partnerships in our continent?
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me. I think before I answer the question, you just talked about UNHCR and how we're viewed as a humanitarian actor. I think UNHCR will always be a humanitarian actor. Our core mandate is protection and solutions for those who are displaced. And populations who are displaced, whether those are refugees or internally displaced people, have a right in law to protection. And so that will always be our core and our primary mandate. However, especially for this continent, we see that displacement is not a short-term event in people's lives. We have very long, protracted situations like the Somalia situation. We have people who are displaced from Somalia since 1991, living in Dadaab refugee camp, and they have been there since. And so when you have populations that are living in displacement for long periods of time, we have to think beyond humanitarian aid. And so this is where the conversation shift to looking at longer term sustainable solutions for those populations. And that's where then my passion to help deliver some of those solutions comes in. And one of the biggest gaps I have seen since I have been working on this continent, or one of the first barriers we had to help try and tackle, was the misconception of what private sector or how private sector can be involved, and a misunderstanding of the needs sometimes of refugees and what solutions might look like and how everybody can come together to help solve those solutions. I think we have come a long way. We have a growing movement, a very strong growing movement of private sector, individuals, foundations, companies who are really stepping up, who are really sharing amongst themselves solutions and ideas and coming together to figure out African solutions to this issue of displacement.
That is fantastic and timely. And we were thinking about and maybe contemplating the shifting aid, right? Everyone in this space is having to rethink their model. They're having to rethink how they will pivot going forward, because the truth is aid as we know it will not be the same, right? And so one of the key conversations and one of the key meetings that are coming up is the Private Sector Forum that will be happening right here in Nairobi. And you were part of the original thinkers or creators of this space. What was the inspiration between yourself and Isaac Kwaku of Amahoro Coalition and Sarah Lane and, all the other, who conceptualized this amazing idea?
Okay, so I will take you back a few years to be able to answer that question. In sometime in 2018, the Global Refugee Compact came into effect. It's a framework that sets out how partners, government partners, the private sector, humanitarian actors, development actors, how all of us taking a whole of society approach, how we can all come together in solidarity to help take responsibility for displacement and solutions for displacement. As we know, on the African continent especially, very many countries are hosting refugees, and it's a global responsibility for everybody to chip in with solutions. So out of the Global Compact on Refugees came a global event called the Global Refugee Forum. And the first one took place in Geneva in 2019. And a group of us from the African continent attended the Global Refugee Forum in 2019, but we observed that we were the minority. There were just about maybe 5 companies from the African continent in a meeting of more than 3,000 people. Wow. And on one of those evenings, the African private sector representatives that were there, Isaac was there, you mentioned Sarilyn from Equity Group. We had a representative from Vodacom Group in South Africa. We had one of our leading supporters here, who is also a former refugee businessman. We had people like Julie Gishuru and Chris Senanu. And we sat down and thought we needed to do this on the African continent, that by the next Global Refugee Forum, we should have a better representation of the African continent by private sector leaders at the forum. And so that's where the original motivation came from. And I am glad that that challenge and inspiration came from the African private sector leaders that were there at the time, because they have really taken it forward. We as UNHCR have helped convene, working with our partners, Amahoro and Inkomoko. We have helped bring together the different actors. And this is going to be our 3rd edition on the 20th and 29th of April here in Nairobi. It's going to be our 3rd event. The first one took place in Kigali. And in 2023, we were in Accra, Ghana. And now we bring it to Nairobi.
I love that. I love solution providers. I love people who see gaps and they're like, no, it cannot be like this. We have to do it differently. And so thank you for taking the challenge and taking the bold step for you and the rest of the team, just to make sure that we come together, we have better representations. And one of the values at Inkomoko, we believe, is that all Africa problems have solutions that exist in Africa. And we're running a campaign this year called Solutions Found Here, because we want to talk more about these solutions. So even as we convene all these actors in this forum and beyond in the conversations that we carry out, what do you see as the biggest mindset shift that still needs to happen in the private sector?
I think the private sector needs to hear, and I don't want to say it's a mind shift, because I see it already happening. You know, I have seen over the last 2 forums the journey that we have made and the progress that we are making. But I think more and more African private sector joining the conversation and understanding that refugees are not a burden, or displaced populations are not a burden. Instead, they are a great business opportunity. They make great sense. I think the misconception that there's very little that private sector can do with refugees. This is not the case, or that it's very difficult and risky to work in refugee hosting areas. It is, but we are also seeing opportunities and barriers. So it's having a realistic appreciation of what the challenges and the risks are, but then also understanding that there are those who are really making shared value opportunities that benefit everybody, that benefit their shareholders, that benefit the companies, their employees, and also help advance the lives and transform lives, not just for those who are displaced, but their host communities as well. If we take Kenya as an example, most of our displaced populations are living in areas of the country where the host communities are also quite disadvantaged, if I may use that term. Yeah. So when you bring solutions to displaced populations, you're not only supporting those who are displaced, you're also supporting the host community, the municipality. The Turkana County benefits greatly, and the people there from any development and any investment we bring there. So that mind shift that we are helping strangers, we are helping people who are living with us in our communities. We are helping our own countries, and we're helping the future of the African continent.
One of the things I always say is that a lot of the global north countries, their economies grew because there was massive displacement in their countries, and those displaced people contributed through either their innovation, hard work, opportunities to actually grow those economies. So and that must have happened many, many decades ago. But when we think of it that way, we can also project where Africa would go if we shift our narratives instead of seeing them as burdens, but they are actually economic opportunity.
Absolutely. And I'm really happy to say that when you go on the ground, in my experience visiting Dadaab or visiting Kakuma, you actually see that in practice. When I go to Kakuma, I meet business people who are working, whether they're from the local communities, the Turkana community, or whether they're a Burundian refugee who has set up there, a Somali refugee who has set up a shop there. There is a lot of interdependency through business happening, and actually with the and coexistence with all of them. So, we can meet in conference rooms in Nairobi. We're actually hoping that on the 28th of April, we will bring a few people down to Kakuma so they can get to experience what a thriving economy, microeconomy, it actually is up there. And to see how displaced populations live so well side by side with their host communities and thrive together. So yeah, I this is something that's already been happening a lot. And what we are doing is now inviting more and more private sector to see the opportunities to invest even more and to support the entrepreneurs and the young people coming out of there. You had that statement about that African problems have African solutions. Another one I like to say is that the young people also have solutions for themselves. And sometimes we just need to give them the space to discuss them and to execute them and support them in their execution.
That was actually one of the best takeouts from my conversation with a co-convener, the curator of Amahoro, Ezekweku, and he said, with the youth, we just need to listen to them better. And so I'm asking myself, with this private sector forum, how do we make sure that the voice of the youth will be included in the conversation?
We do that very intentionally. It's been one of the special things about our forum. At every forum, we dedicate a day and time in the program for young people to talk about their solutions that they put forward and propose. And this year will be no different. We're coming down to Kakuma and actually looking at, for example, the Amahoro Fellows and what they've been able to do, the clients of Inkomoko and seeing what they're doing there. We also, by the way, have the wonderful support of the Mastercard Foundation and the IKEA Foundation as well, who will be with us. And so just seeing all these young people across the board who are doing amazing things, who are entrepreneurs, who are changing their communities and giving them space intentionally in the program to drive the conversation is what the forum is also about. It's about the private sector, the young people, and everybody that really wants to bring solutions to this space.
The reality is there exists a huge barrier for these young people, legal identities, and leveraging, I guess, to some level, technology. We're in the technology age. We're not going to run away from the AI and so on. So I'm just thinking in terms of maybe bringing the policymakers in the conversation beyond just the forum. How do we leverage, or how do we take from good examples around the continent?
We've seen this happening quite a lot also within our forum, that it is now really a multi-stakeholder convening. So we have those policymakers present. We work closely with governments and with other partners as well, and we're having those conversations. And one of the best thing about it is when you have a Pan-African event like this one, you get to see examples from different places. What is working in Uganda? What is working in Ghana? And people learn from one another. And that is happening both for the private sector, but also from a policy perspective. And how different countries are addressing certain policy barriers or issues. And there's just so much to learn. So, and we really encourage that. So we also have in the program space for our government counterparts to listen but also to showcase what they're doing. I'm sure you know that Kenya just launched the Shirika Plan,
Yes.
for example. So I hope that we will hear a little bit more about that at this forum and how private sector can help in its implementation. And so there's a lot of progress across the board on policy. Yes, for sure, there's some barriers. Some places are doing better than others. And we all get to learn together and see how we can support that access. And the young people also get to tell us where the pain points are for them, what they're struggling with when they're trying to improve, whether it's through access to jobs or whether it's through access to loans to improve their businesses. We also get to hear from them and together think about what the solutions could look like. But take it a step further, make commitments to actually help remove those barriers.
What is one example of some form of innovation? I know you've been all over the world. You've met so many displaced persons doing different things. But in the context of Africa, is there either an innovation or a technology or a solution that you saw that really inspired you?
I focus on partnerships. And one of the things that really inspires me is when I see people thinking about partnerships differently, like what a partnership could look like that is whose objective is to solve a particular problem, who partners, how we partner, who we invite to collaborate with us. That's one thing. And I think when it comes to Africa, sometimes it's not so much about coming up with another new thing. Sometimes it's about application. So it could be a model or a product or a service that's already working really, really well in another sector, in another context, but applying it to the displacement context, right? So for example, recently I was in Nigeria, and in Nigeria we have a partnership with one of the local states governments and a private sector company, an agribusiness private sector company. And in this partnership, the state government provides land. Internally displaced people, convened, mobilized, organized by UNHCR, make use of this land with the support of a private sector company who is giving inputs and then buying the outputs from the farmers who then farm that. That's an outgrower model. I grew up with outgrower models. I grew up with cooperatives. My father is a long-time cooperative man. So I've seen that model all my life growing up. But seeing it applied in a displacement context and seeing the impact that will have on these populations in northern Nigeria is really inspiring for me. So sometimes it's the simplest of things. It's things that work in other places, but being able to bring them here. This partnership we have here between UNHCR and Amahoro and Nkomoko is, in my mind, innovative. Who would have thought that this would be the three partners that decide to tackle how African private sector is involved in this conversation?
That's true,
right? And so it's a lot about that. It goes from how we use modern technology from AI, but it also goes to how we think about problems differently and how we think about solving them differently and bringing on board people with different mindsets, people with different skills to help solve those problems.
Fantastic. For this year's Africa Private Sector Forum, what is a core message you want businesses to take away?
That refugee hosting areas or context of displacement, to be more broad, because actually on the African continent, we do have more people who are internally displaced as well. So remembering those, we also have stateless people. So when we talk about displacement in general, it's a bit more broad. So I would like for private sector to come to this forum and leave knowing that there's a lot of opportunities, business opportunities in these areas to collaborate, and especially if they're purpose-driven businesses, it makes business sense, it makes socio-economic sense for themselves, for the people that we serve or that we are looking to work together with, and for the countries.
We have a figure to prove that. 97% repayment rate of our clients. We are approaching 100,000 clients at iNKOMOKO. 97% have repaid their investment.
Yes, I hear this story really, and it's so encouraging. Most of the banks that also bank in these areas, in whether you're talking to KCB or Equity Group, quote similar numbers. that the default rate is extremely low when it comes to this population. Those are the messages we want to get out there, and that we want the private sector to know that there is a lot of commercial reasons why they should be considering venturing and investing in displacement context.
It's a win-win.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's a win-win also for the policymakers, because these displaced entrepreneurs or populations are contributing to the economy, tax-wise and in other ways. So
yes, and we need to make it easier for them to contribute. So when we have, I was speaking to somebody just a couple of days ago that told me they were working with urban refugees, about 800 of them that are really looking to be registered, licensed, so that they can pay their rates.
Wow.
Refugees want to live within the law and contribute and be, and when they do that, it's also about dignity. And most refugees you speak to want an opportunity, or they want to go back home. Nobody becomes forcibly displaced out of choice. Right? So if we can shift to think that way, that these are people who want to be included and to contribute to the economies, and we need to think about how we make that easier for them, not more difficult for them.
That is fantastic. So when I get to know Nancy a little bit better, is there a quote or a book that you read recently, or a quote you had recently that has, or previously, that has impacted you?
Not a quote, but something I live by. I believe in leading with kindness. And what that means to me is that in everything that we do, that at the end of the day, when all is said and done, it's about our human connection. And whether it's at work or at home or in across the board in everything that we do, and especially in the times that we're in currently, I think leading with kindness and with compassion, with understanding, is something that means a lot to me, and is something that I believe also helps us create a better world for everybody.
That is awesome. And I think you've lived that and proved that with such an accomplished career and the many fantastic milestones you've had, in your work, including this private sector forum with other co-conveners. So this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Nancy. We are honored that you took the time to have this conversation with us. We, as iNKOMOKO, really looking forward to conduct this event together and achieve some really good results and some really great conversations, as well as insights, and for more partnerships coming in the future because of the work that we're doing together. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll have another conversation in the future.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure, and we're looking forward to the 28th and the 29th and making a lot more impact together.
Fantastic.